Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us on this busy news day. We begin with the Biden administration pleading for patience as at least 46 states pause distribution of the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine. The FDA and the CDC recommended the temporary halt Tuesday. Health officials are investigating what they call extremely rare cases of blood clots developing days after Johnson & Johnson's single-dose shot. So far, 6 cases have been reported out of nearly 7 million doses. The nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, says the pause is a precautionary measure and a way for the government to look into the issue without any more potential cases in the meantime. Here's how President Biden responded to the news.
My message to the American people on the vaccine is, I told you all, I made sure we have 600 million doses of the mRNA, not of either Johnson & Johnson and or AstraZeneca. So there's enough vaccine that is basically 100% unquestionable for every single solitary American.
Meanwhile, from domestic to foreign policy developments, the White House confirms President Biden is ordering the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan by September 11th of this year. That deadline is the 20th anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. President Biden is set to announce the plans Wednesday. The drawdown is expected to begin by the end of this month. If this goal is met, it could mean the end of what is the longest war in U.S. history. Here's how the White House previewed the move earlier.
The president has been consistent in his view that there's not a military solution to Afghanistan, that we have been there for far too long. He believes that, and he remains committed to supporting negotiations between the parties, which many of you may be following, are resuming next week. And he also believes we need to focus our resources on fighting the threats we face today, 20 years, almost 20 years after the war began.
Ed O'Keefe, Zeke Miller, and Meridith McGraw join me now. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Meridith is a White House reporter for Politico. Welcome. It's good to see you all. Ed, let me start with you. As you well know, President Biden had previously told CBS News during the campaign he wanted to keep a small number of troops in Afghanistan. What changed?
Well, what apparently has changed is this exhaustive policy review they've been undertaking since he took office that just determines, as you heard Jen Psaki there say, there is no military solution to the situation in Afghanistan, but a diplomatic one can continue in terms of trying to broker peace between the Afghan government and the Taliban. The Afghan government has warned that if the United States leaves, it could very well lead to civil war. There are grave concerns among many Republicans expressed today that this is premature, hasty, and will lead to a resumption of al-Qaeda and the Taliban's dominance in that region. But as part of this review, the administration has determined that al-Qaeda, at least, has no ability to put together any kind of significant external threat right now from Afghanistan, and therefore there's no need to continue with this presence. This is something that people will remember if you've tracked his career as a senator and then vice president, that the now President Biden was skeptical of military involvement in Afghanistan and has believed that it wasn't necessary. And in that Face the Nation interview he did last year, right on the eve of the Nevada caucus with our Margaret Brennan, he made very clear, look, you're going to hear, for example, in the next few days, Republicans and critics of this decision say that if, for example, women and children lose their rights in Afghanistan that they've won back from the Taliban over the last 20 years, that'll be the president's fault. He said in response to Margaret Brennan when she asked him that, no, he will not feel that he is responsible for that decision, that if that were the policy of the United States military would have to go into several other countries around the world to try to win back rights for women and children, and that he does not believe that that is in the national security interest of the United States. So this will be an argument he'll make tomorrow at the White House. We expect it will face criticism and that there will be explanations sought by Congress. But it's one that ultimately the White House believes, again, is backed by an exhaustive military review and one that Americans overall will ultimately support.
Well, Zeke, this September 11th deadline is pushed back from the timeline the Trump administration negotiated with the Taliban. What has the reaction been in Afghanistan and in the U.S. to this news?
Well, obviously, the Afghan government, which has really been propped up by U.S. military, the U.S. military presence there for the better part of the last decade and a half, there's certainly a lot of skepticism from their standpoint of the U.S. withdrawal, concerns that their government could potentially fall as a result of it. But that said, this is a little bit of a stay from that May 1st deadline that was negotiated and essentially unilaterally implemented by the Trump administration back last year. So this does buy them some more time to try to reach some sort of diplomatic solution with the Taliban, if one is possible. The Afghan government doesn't really think one is possible. The U.S. certainly has a lot more hope for that, and they have some more time for that.
Well, Meridith, in addition to Afghanistan, we learned that President Biden spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin Tuesday morning, hinting at a potential summit, between the two leaders. So what do we know so far?
Well, this potential summit would be the first meeting between a U.S. president and Putin since, of course, Donald Trump's meeting with Putin in Helsinki, Finland in 2018. But it comes on the heels of what we've seen in Ukraine and then in Crimea, of an increase in Russian aggression and warfare in the region, and real concerns over escalations. And Secretary of State Blinken is in Brussels, and President Biden recently spoke with Ukraine's president about their own concerns and have sided with them. But Biden has shown that he's willing to push back on Putin in ways that we didn't see from the Trump administration. Although they've extended the New START nuclear arms treaty, he's also said that he's going to try to hold Russia accountable for what they've seen in terms of election interference, and their actions in Ukraine and the SolarWinds hack, among other things. But on Ukraine, although the Biden administration has said that there will be consequences for Russia's actions, one thing that has not been clear is what exactly those consequences would be.
Well, Zeke, I want to turn back to the Johnson & Johnson vaccine news, which I know you've been following closely today. Now, this news came suddenly to state leaders. What's the impact been?
Well, certainly we've seen vaccinations, sort of injections almost being ripped out of the arms of pharmacists in some of these states. One of my colleagues in New Jersey interviewed somebody who got a vaccine just seconds before they got a push alert on their phone saying that the FDA had requested a halt. This happened very suddenly. Wow. The White House was informed that there was an announcement last night. And then this morning, they actually learned the substance of that announcement. And that was essentially the FDA and CDC were recommending this nationwide pause in the administration of Johnson & Johnson vaccines. The White House acknowledges that there was not enough time here to read everyone into that decision. It was done quickly, and there's point to that is sort of testament to the role of science driving this decision. Had they been given a heads up or a role in the decision-making process there, or a heads up before anyone else, then they, from their standpoint, they would then be involved in politicizing a scientific discussion. So they're saying that it's sort of the virtue in everyone being caught by surprise speaks to the role that science is playing in sort of driving the federal government's response to the pandemic right now. That's obviously not necessarily the most satisfying answer for people who are expecting to get the J&J vaccines today and in the days ahead. But the White House is saying they're working with these local providers to try to reschedule those folks for Pfizer and Moderna shots as quickly as possible.
Well, Meridith, we saw former President Trump jump on this news, calling it a political attack on the Trump administration's efforts. Are there concerns about ripple effects when it comes to vaccine hesitancy, especially among some Republicans who, according to polling, have been skeptical of vaccines so far?
Well, this news does come at a tricky time. And as you noted, there has been a lot of vaccine skepticism. Even though over half the country has gotten at least one shot of the vaccine, there's still a sizable chunk of the population that is wary of getting the shot. And that's a problem, health experts say, as we try to push towards herd immunity. And the Biden White House has said they've been trying to make inroads with some of those skeptical communities. They noted doing advertisements on country music television, and there have been lots of PSAs. And there's also been a huge push, of course, to reach out to people at the local level, to reach out to doctors, to reach out to community leaders, and also pastors. Polls have shown that white evangelicals are among the most skeptical of getting the vaccine. But the former president's statement today, I'm not sure if that helped in terms of quelling any of the politicization that we've seen of this vaccine. But I will note that among the things he did say at the very end of his statement was that it is important for all Americans to get the vaccine in order to end this pandemic.
Well, Ed, at the top, we heard President Biden weigh in on the vaccine news in his meeting with Congressional Black Caucus members. I want to play you his comments on those ongoing protests in Minnesota after the killing of Daunte Wright and the ongoing Derek Chauvin murder trial. Let's listen to that.
I know it's been a pretty painful week, you know, with the losses we've had, you know, with Daunte Wright in Minnesota, that god-awful shooting and resulting in his death, and in the midst of an ongoing trial over the killing of George Floyd, and Lord only knows what's happened based on what the verdict will or will not be there. And but we're in the business, all of us meeting today, to deliver some real change.
So, Ed, how is the White House approaching this issue, given their limited capacity to implement change by themselves?
Well, it's notable that he made these comments after a meeting with members of the Congressional Black Caucus, or in the midst of a meeting with members of the Congressional Black Caucus. It's notable that he talked about it at all. And in that regard, that is part of their response. The fact that you have a president who speaks quite openly about it, who says he understands the situation, and meets with policymakers who are perhaps better than most understanding and eager to address this issue. One thing we know that it will not involve ultimately now is calls for some kind of a police commission, as he did during the campaign last year. The White House now acknowledging that's not part of the plan because they're pushing for other police reforms that are part of the George Floyd Act that is up for consideration in Congress. This remains a tricky situation for a White House that understands that to some extent there's only so much Washington can do to respond to local police concerns. But there are proposals out there to more aggressively track this, to hold local police agencies accountable if this kind of behavior continues, to set up monitoring, as the Justice Department has done in the past, of troubled police departments. And, we await more action and more steps on this in the coming weeks. It's the same situation that's tripped up the gun control debate to some extent, because for so long the White House was saying, well, we don't entirely have leadership in place at the Justice Department that will allow us to address this. Well, they're there now, and we know that at some point there's going to have to be more done from a policy standpoint, and eventually Democrats would hope through legislation. But I think, again, holding meetings like the one he held today to talk about a range of issues, but also undoubtedly this one, and then having a president and vice president who speak quite frequently and openly about their concerns with this and acknowledging the concerns that so many Americans have with it, is in many regards, to this administration at least, a sea change from the last 4 years.
All right, Ed O'Keefe, Zeke Miller, and Meridith McGraw, thank you all very much.